She held the knife like she was hosting a late-night talk show, the patio lights bouncing off her champagne glass as if the spotlight wasn't enough. "To Greg," she said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "my dear husband, who once told me I was dreaming too big." She turned, full theatrical pause, her heels clicking as she faced her guests. "Here's your cake, loser." And they laughed. The VP of marketing nearly choked on his spritzer. Some guy from sales slapped the table. Even her assistant, that nervous one who kept calling her boss lady, let out an awkward giggle and immediately looked at Greg like a kid caught breaking a vase. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just blinked slowly and glanced across the patio to where his parents were sitting, legs crossed neatly, both of them holding little dessert plates with untouched cake. His father's hand trembled slightly, not from the words, but from the Parkinson's. His mother, bless her, looked like she'd been kicked in the chest and was trying to decide whether to vomit or cry. And Dana, she just kept grinning like she'd landed the punchline of the decade. Greg looked back at her. Tall, sharp dress, diamond studs that didn't exist before the last business trip. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if noting the time of death of something he hadn't realized had flatlined months ago. He didn't say a word. He just turned toward the grill, flipped the burner off, and covered the ribs, because God forbid the sauce dry out. Someone came over to pat him on the shoulder. He didn't look up to see who. It didn't matter. Whoever it was had already laughed. It was supposed to be Dana's night. Her idea. Her homecoming from the glass ceiling, she called it. She'd insisted they host it at their place, so my team sees I can be fun too, she'd said, handing Greg a to-do list like a corporate mandate. And he did it. Cleaned the deck. Set up the extra seating. Built a Spotify playlist labeled Dana's Big Night, with songs she used to dance to back when they still did things like that together. He even bought the cake. Red velvet. Her favorite. Gold lettering. Congratulations, Dana. She had scraped it off with a fork before the guest arrived. Said it looked too desperate. Then replaced it with that now immortal line written in black gel icing. He hadn't even noticed the switch until she cut it in front of everyone. "You knew I was joking, right?" she whispered to him later, when the crowd thinned and the music dulled. But he just gave her that same nod. The one that had carried him through 32 years of drafting failures, supplier drama, and boardroom layoffs. Not agreement. Not forgiveness. Just noted. What she didn't know, what no one did, was that Greg had already started seeing her clearly weeks ago. She thought he was invisible in that room. That he was just a prop in her power-fueled narrative. But the real show had already begun. And tonight, Dana forgot something very important. She forgot that even ghosts can watch. It started with the toothbrush. A second one. Blue. Slightly curved handle. Not his. Tucked behind the mouthwash like it belonged there. Greg had stood in front of the mirror that morning, toothbrush halfway to his mouth, staring at it like it was a hallucination. Dana had always been meticulous about her stuff, color-coded, compartmentalized, obsessive. She didn't just buy a new one, without tossing the old. And she sure as hell didn't forget which color was hers. He didn't say anything. That was Greg's specialty, not saying anything. It bought him time, gave him space to observe. And lately, there was a lot to observe. Late nights were chalked up to client demands. Locked screens to compliance protocols. She even blamed the new security policy when he couldn't access their shared tablet anymore. It's the IT department. They locked it up weird, she'd said, as not quite meeting his. Her face tight, like a too smooth surface stretched over something seething underneath. And then came Mick. Mick from legal. He was in every damn story. Mick thinks I should speak at the next conference. Mick says my analysis saved the Simmons account. Mick said he's never seen anyone lead a team like I do. Greg started referring to him in his head as Mick the Apostle, the way Dana recited his praise like scripture. So Greg did what Dana never expected. He logged in. Not to her current devices, she was too careful now. But the old ones? The ones gathering dust in the spare room drawer? Yeah, those still whispered secrets if you knew how to listen. Cloud backups were still syncing to her old iPad. And when he opened the Photos app, what he saw knocked the breath clean out of him, but didn't break him. Not right away. She was in a black one-piece, drink in hand, on a balcony somewhere sunny. Greg could tell by the wallpaper it wasn't a business trip. She was with Mick. Arms draped around each other like a honeymoon cliché. He flipped through, each photo worse than the last. Then came the videos. Laughter. Dancing. Her voice, sweetened by alcohol, calling Mick baby. A clip of her riding his back in a pool, shrieking like a teenager. Another of her feeding him room service pancakes in bed, topless, the sheet slipping lower each time she leaned in. And the final one, the one Greg only watched once, was in grainy night vision. The phone must have been resting on a dresser. They were mid-act. Greg paused it halfway through. Not because it was unbearable, but because he'd seen everything he needed. He found the emails next. She hadn't logged out of her old Gmail. Not the one she gave clients, the private one. There were messages to Mick with subject lines like, still at work winking face, and he bought it again LOL. In one, she wrote, Greg thinks I'm pulling all-nighters to impress the partners. Pathetic. He actually made me a protein shake this morning. God. He's like, grateful I'm ignoring him. Greg read that one twice. Then again. Then he closed the laptop and stood very still for a long time. No yelling. No calling. No confrontation. Instead, he went to the garage, opened the safe, and pulled out his external drives. Copied everything, photos, videos, emails, calendar pings. Cataloged it by date. Labeled it Dana_ethics_evidence_001. Then he made 3 more copies. One for the safe, one in the glove box, and one with a friend who didn't ask questions. He didn't need revenge. Not yet. He needed patience. And proof. Because Dana didn't just cheat on her husband. She underestimated a man who'd made a 30-year career out of solving catastrophic system failures without ever raising his voice. While Dana floated from guest to guest with her Prosecco grin and over-rehearsed anecdotes about rising above mediocrity, Greg was in the laundry room, scanning documents between refilling the chip bowl and re-icing the champagne bucket. Not out of nerves. Out of routine. Precision was second nature to him. And tonight, every click, every page, every byte he moved into place was another brick in the quiet detonation he'd been constructing for weeks. The cake had been delivered that afternoon, triple-layered, buttercream-frosted hypocrisy. She insisted on writing her own message. Greg had watched her scratch out the original congratulations and squeeze on her little roast with the steadiness of someone who thought cruelty was charisma. But the joke, the one that made Mick from legal giggle into his gin and tonic, was just the ribbon on the real gift Greg had prepared. Behind a locked folder labeled Client Budgets Q4, on his encrypted USB drive was an evidence chain that would make most IT auditors weep with joy. Photos. Timestamped metadata. Cross-referenced travel receipts. Email headers showing corporate card misuse during the weekend. Dana claimed she was off-grid with women from the Women in Leadership cohort. A $427 charge from the hotel spa tagged as client meal. A poolside selfie where Mick's hand was very much not in a professional location. He'd spent the last 3 weeks compiling it all like a seasoned archivist. The receipts. The calendar entries. The Slack messages. Even a Teams call recording where Mick referred to Dana as babe, and she didn't correct him, even though her direct reports were on the call. But that wasn't the real masterpiece. That came in the form of a brown envelope, sealed and waiting in his briefcase upstairs. Inside was a full draft of their financial separation agreement, tailored, notarized, clean. No messy drama. No hysterics. Just line items, asset division, pension adjustments, and a modest note in the margin. This is not a divorce filing yet. He'd also submitted a tip, anonymous, of course, to the company's ethics hotline. It was short. Just a file upload in 2 lines. Senior manager engaged in an ongoing affair with a subordinate. Used corporate resources for personal travel. Proof attached. He scheduled the submission for 7:45 a.m. the next morning. That way, it would be in the inbox before the first executive meeting. He wasn't being vindictive. He was being thorough. While Dana was clinking glasses and pretending the patio string lights made her look more approachable, Greg was setting the final permissions on the backup folder he'd created, shared only with one other email. A friend in legal compliance. No subject line. No signature. Just a link and the words. If something happens to me, make sure this reaches HR. He didn't expect danger. Dana wasn't the violent type. But the humiliation she'd fed him over months, years, quietly escalating until she thought herself untouchable, wasn't going to end with a cake and a snide toast. It would end when the system she worshipped turned on her. She always thought Greg was boring, steady, predictable. She forgot that predictable people make excellent planners. And this wasn't just a plan. It was a quiet execution with frosting on top. The guests left just before midnight, still laughing, though by then it was less at Dana's wit and more from the stale wine and overcompensating awkwardness that clung to the last hour like cheap perfume. A few compliments about the house, a passing, "Your husband's such a good sport," and then tires on gravel. Silence, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint bass line of the playlist Greg forgot to turn off. Dana walked in from the patio like she'd just closed a billion-dollar merger, kicked off her heels by the door, unzipped her dress in the kitchen like the house owed her a round of applause. Her lipstick was smudged and her smile was still sharp. There was glitter in her hair, and Greg made a note to vacuum the rug in the morning before his mother saw it. He stood at the sink, rinsing wine glasses. Quiet, efficient. Watching the red swirl down the drain felt oddly satisfying. She patted past him in a silk robe she hadn't worn in months, probably to remind him what he was losing or what Mick was currently enjoying. She paused at the foot of the stairs and tossed over her shoulder. "You took that well." He didn't turn, just set another glass upside down on the drying rack. Dana chuckled like they were in on the same joke. "You know I was joking, right?" Greg finally turned his head slightly. "Sure." Then back to rinsing. Just like that. No anger. No sarcasm. Just a flat note of indifference that clipped her ego like a loose wire. But she didn't notice. Not really. Because she wasn't listening. By the time he made it upstairs, she was in bed, sprawled diagonally like she always did when she thought she'd won something. He walked into the bathroom, brushed his teeth slowly, methodically, like he had all the time in the world. The blue toothbrush was still there, untouched. Another silent flag waving in her corner of the vanity. He didn't move it, just noted it. Again, when he walked into the bedroom, Dana looked up at him from her pillow. "It was a joke, Greg. You're not actually upset, are you?" He turned off the lamp, sat on the edge of the bed, then slid under the covers without facing her. The darkness closed in like an honest conversation no one wanted to start. She shifted beside him, then added with a small scoff, "God, you're so sensitive sometimes. That's part of the problem, you know?" Greg stared at the ceiling. He counted the slow, pulsing hum of the ceiling fan, an old habit from insomnia during deadlines years ago. Click, click, whir. The irony was that Dana had always framed him as the emotionally absent one. Distant, quiet, dull. But silence isn't the absence of emotion. It's the warehouse where you store it until it stops screaming and starts planning. And he had been planning. What she didn't understand, what she never understood, was that Greg's silence wasn't surrender. It was surveillance. Dana wasn't joking. She never was. Not when she mocked his job, or the way he dressed, or the fact that he still called his mother every Sunday. Not when she left her phone face down at dinner. Not when she forgot their anniversary because she was under so much pressure at work. And certainly not when she toasted him in front of her colleagues with that snide little eulogy of a marriage. That wasn't a joke. That was her confession, wrapped in frosting and arrogance. She thought he'd swallowed it like everything else. But Greg didn't swallow it. He recorded it. And in that moment, as she drifted off in the glow of her self-made spotlight, Greg stared at the ceiling and made a final, silent commitment. Tomorrow, she'd wake up thinking she'd won. And by the end of the day, she'd learn how thoroughly she'd lost. Dana always slept late after a party. She called it decompression, though Greg had long suspected it was just the hangover of maintaining a persona. She stirred only once during the early morning quiet, mumbling something unintelligible and rolling onto his side of the bed like she hadn't already annexed every other inch of the house. Greg was in the kitchen by 7 a.m. made coffee, toasted a bagel, fed the neighbor's cat. They were out of town, and he had a key. Routine grounded him. So did the knowledge that, as he stirred a little creamer into his cup, a different kind of morning was already unfolding downtown. At 8:12 a.m., Dana's phone rang. Private number. She grunted, face half buried in the pillow. Then, without lifting her head, she slapped around the nightstand until she found it. "Hello." Her voice was still thick with sleep and Chardonnay. Then came the pause. Greg heard it from downstairs, this odd pocket of silence, like the air had been sucked out of the second floor. Then he heard the sheets shift fast. A gasp. The creak of the headboard. The unmistakable bolt-upright moment. He didn't move. She thundered down the stairs in her robe, phone clutched in both hands like it was vibrating with explosives. "Greg," she said, tight-lipped, wide-eyed. Did you do something?" He looked up from his coffee, one eyebrow slightly raised. "Something like what?" "They just called. From the office." Her hand was shaking. "It was Angela, my boss's assistant. She told me I need to come in. Immediately. Not to use the company laptop. To bring my personal phone." She held the device up like she expected him to confess into it. Greg took a slow sip of coffee. "Sounds serious." She narrowed her eyes. "Greg." He leaned back in the chair, the morning sun hitting his face through the blinds, casting long shadows on the floor. He held her gaze, then said, softly, like reciting a reminder on a shopping list. "I'm just the loser, remember?" Dana opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just air. Her expression flickered, confusion, suspicion, maybe even fear, but it couldn't stick. Not yet. She wasn't used to being on the back foot. Greg stood up slowly, brought his mug to the sink, and rinsed it out. "You should get dressed," he said without looking at her. "Wouldn't want to keep Angela waiting." Dana didn't move. Just stood in the kitchen like someone had pulled the rug out from under her favorite fantasy and left her barefoot on the cold floor of reality. Greg walked past her to the front window and pulled the curtain aside, just a sliver. Outside, the world went on as usual. A dog walker. A jogger. The mail truck rolling up the hill. He didn't need to ask if the call had anything to do with the ethics hotline submission. He already knew it did. The timestamp, the file, the folder, all synced, encrypted, triggered with a delay. The bomb had gone off. All that was left now was the fallout. Dana turned slowly toward the stairs, her fingers still curled around the phone like it might offer salvation if she stared hard enough. Greg sat back down. He picked up the paper, flipped past the sports section, unfolded the crossword. Outside, a car engine roared to life. Tires squealed just slightly. He smiled at 5 down. Consequence, 5 letters. Answer? Truth. Dana tore out of the driveway like the house was on fire. No makeup, hair barely combed, dress shirt half-buttoned over leggings she probably forgot weren't pants. Her bag was still open on the passenger seat, papers, cosmetics, and a phone charger spilling like entrails. The garage door hadn't even finished lifting when she slammed the car into reverse and nearly clipped the trash bins. Greg didn't flinch. He stood behind the curtain in the upstairs hallway, the one that gave a perfect diagonal view of the street. Not enough to be seen, just enough to see. As her taillights whipped around the corner, he pulled out his phone and sent a single message. "She's in motion. Delivered. Read." No emoji. No follow-up. That friend, if you could still call him that, had worked compliance at Dana's firm for over a decade before they axed half the team in a budget shuffle. Greg had stayed in touch. They bonded years ago over dry ribs and a mutual disdain for performative management. When Greg reached out a few weeks back asking for a friendly ear off the record, the guy didn't even hesitate. Now, the chess pieces were moving. The report Greg submitted, disguised as an anonymous ethics complaint, had officially cleared intake. That meant timestamped confirmation, logged IP routing through a masked VPN, and direct delivery to internal legal with a reference number. That same reference number was attached to the video. Not a video. The video. The one Dana recorded, stupidly, while pretending to be discreet. Hotel suite, Mick's voice muffled in the background, and Dana spinning toward the camera in lingerie with a giggle. "This is way better than those sad little work dinners." Huh? The footage wasn't pornographic, not entirely. But it didn't need to be. The timestamp, the metadata, the audio, it all told the story. Greg didn't send the riskiest videos. He didn't need to. He sent the right one. The one with her laughing as she held a glass of wine purchased on the corporate card at a resort labeled in her calendar as client relations training. The compliance friend had watched it. Called it clean, which in that world meant damning. No ambiguity. No plausible deniability. Just a well-edited montage of arrogance and poor judgment. Greg backed away from the window, finally, when her car disappeared past the hill. He walked to the closet and pulled out a small fireproof lockbox. Inside, a backup drive, 2 manila folders, and a typed letter with a sticky note that simply said, "In the event of escalation." He didn't think it would come to that. But then again, Dana never thought he would come to this. He sat on the bed, slowly unlacing his shoes. No rush. The next few hours weren't his to manage. They belonged to her now. Her lies. Her performance. Her damage control. He imagined her trying to stay composed while Angela greeted her at the office. Trying to explain why her phone was ringing nonstop. Trying to act like everything was normal when her team was already whispering. Because word always spreads faster than memos. He imagined her eyes scanning every phase for signs of knowledge, every sentence for subtext. She'd walk into that building thinking she could bluff her way through anything. But Greg had engineered systems for 30 years. He knew the moment a load-bearing structure started to fail, Dana was already cracking. And the best part? He hadn't even touched her. He just showed the right people where to look. The first vibration came as Greg was slicing into his eggs. Sunny side up. Just how his dad liked them. His mother was sipping tea, her posture still regal despite the years, her pinky always slightly lifted. They talked about the garden. Tomatoes coming in late this year. The tulips didn't make it through the frost. Normal things. Anchoring things. Buzz. He glanced at the screen. Dana. He didn't open it. Not because he was afraid of what she might say, but because he already knew. Buzz. Buzz. Then again. A pause. Another. They started to stack. His phone danced across the table like a restless insect. He silenced it and slid it into his pocket. His mother noticed, of course. She always noticed everything, even when she didn't say a word. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked gently, not looking up from buttering her toast. Greg nodded, calm. Just Dana having a rough morning. His father chuckled dryly, barely glancing over his newspaper. Shouldn't have made fun of the cook, then. Greg actually smiled at that. First real smile in days. Maybe weeks. By the time the syrup hit the pancakes, Dana had sent 12 messages. By the coffee refill, she was at 24. At message 37, the tone shifted. The first ones were panicked, rage, and quick bursts. "What did you send them? I need you to answer me. You don't understand what you've done." As if she thought this was some mistake. Like he'd accidentally tripped over her little affair and fumbled it into HR. As if the evidence folder had built itself overnight. As if her career had cracked under the weight of his confusion, not her ego. Greg kept sipping coffee, letting the storm swell in the pocket of his jeans. His mom began telling a story about the first time Greg rode a bike without training wheels. His dad interjected with the correction that it was, in fact, a tricycle, and the two fell into a warm, familiar bicker. He liked that story. When text number 51 came through, he finally pulled the phone from his pocket, not to read the messages, but to mute the thread. Still, he glanced. It simply said, "Please, Greg, I'll explain everything." He stared at that line for a beat. That one made him pause, not because he believed her, but because of the absurdity of it. As if now, at this hour, this collapse, she finally thought explanations mattered. As if the word everything was even in her vocabulary. He set the phone face down on the table and nodded along to his mother's story. Something about scraped knees and a Band-Aid with cartoon ducks on it. Dana was unraveling. Every message was another stitch popping loose in the perfectly tailored narrative she'd sewn for herself. The empowered career woman, the charming mentor, the office favorite, the too-good-for-Greg wife who had outgrown. The man who once made her pasta from scratch on a Tuesday just because she said she missed Rome. Greg watched his parents. Listened to them finish each other's sentences. Noticed the way his dad still poured her tea first, even with shaky hands. And then he thought about Dana. Alone. In a cold office. Facing a wall of HR suits with her own words looped back to her in video form. Her own laughter used as Exhibit A. She had been building a narrative. He had just given it an ending. Dana was still breathless when she stepped into the elevator. Her ID badge didn't skin the first time, her hands were trembling too hard to line it up. The security guard tried to make a joke about rough morning, but she didn't laugh. She didn't even look at him. 30 floors. She watched the numbers climb like a countdown to execution. Somewhere between 18 and 19, her legs started to shake. At 27, she put her hand on the railing. By 30, her reflection in the steel doors was a stranger, smeared mascara, collar twisted, sweat blooming under her arms. This wasn't the woman who'd stood in front of her team last week and declared herself a model for female leadership in corporate culture. The elevator opened. No one greeted her. No assistant with a coffee. No cheerful chatter. Just silence in a hallway that looked too long. At the end, conference room B. Inside, HR director. Her department head. Mick's boss. No Angela. No familiar lifeline. The seating arrangement said everything 3 on one side, 1 empty chair on the other, and a company-issued tissue box dead center. She hesitated in the doorway. The HR director motioned without a smile. Have a seat, Dana. She did. They let her settle in before sliding the laptop across the table. It was already queued up. No introduction. No preamble. Just a question. Do you deny this footage is you and Mick, filmed while using the corporate travel card for a client visit? Dana blinked. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She glanced down at the laptop. There it was. Her laugh. Her champagne glass. The flick of her hand brushing Mick's tie as they stood in a hotel suite that was not on the approved list. Her voice, clear as a bell. This is way better than that fake dinner with the IT guys. Another laugh. Then Mick's voice. Think Greg suspects anything? And her response, so flippant, so casual. Please. He still makes me lunch like a grateful little puppy. She slapped her own thigh in the video. Back in the room, the silence was brutal. The HR director leaned back. Her department head's face was blank, but his fingers were clenched on the table. Mick's boss? Not angry. Disgusted. He looked like he'd smelled something rotting. Dana started to speak, stopped, then reached for the tissue box. 1, 2. She dabbed at her eyes. Tried to compose herself. This has been taken out of context, she said finally, her voice breaking. It was not what it looks like. The HR director cut her off without raising his voice. Dana, this wasn't a one-time lapse. This is a pattern. We've cross-referenced your calendar entries with the corporate card charges. The video alone. I was drunk, she blurted. It wasn't official travel, I know that. But it wasn't a client visit, either. It was just personal. Stupid. Okay? We weren't trying to cheat the company. Then why did you log the hotel under client hosting? Greenlight Ventures? Her boss snapped. Dana froze. The folder name. The falsified report. She had forgotten. Please, she said, voice smaller now. Please. Just give me a chance to explain to the board. I'll fix this. I'll resign from the promotion. I'll take the leave. Please don't ruin me over this. But the room didn't move. Not an inch of sympathy. Because she wasn't being punished for the affair. Not directly. That wasn't what disgusted them. That wasn't what got people fired. What got people fired was using the company's name, money, and credibility to finance a personal affair while simultaneously mocking a colleague, her own husband, and company resources on company time. That was what killed careers. And everyone in the room knew it. So when Dana began to cry, full, broken sobs, she wasn't just grieving the mistake. She was grieving the myth she built around herself. The untouchable star. And Greg? Greg had never needed to raise his voice. All he had to do was let the evidence speak louder than the persona. And it did. Mick broke before lunch. No spine, no fight, just a folded suit and a survival instinct. HR barely had to press. The minute they showed him the footage, he started sweating like a faucet and begging to handle this internally. But internal didn't mean quiet. It just meant fast. He played the only card men like him ever do when cornered. Blame the woman. She pressured me, he said, trying to look wounded. It wasn't like I wanted this. She made it seem like we had to take the trip. For optics. For team morale. I was afraid to say no, honestly. He made himself sound like a hostage. Like Dana was a siren in heels luring him into hotel receipts and misused budgets. Like he'd just been along for the ride, a good boy with bad judgment and a suddenly inconvenient erection. He called it a lapse. Just one. He called her charismatic, assertive, intimidating. And it worked. Sort of. By 11 a.m., Mick was terminated. Immediate dismissal. Badge deactivated. Security escorted him out the back. No time to pack his desk. Someone else would box up his stress ball collection and his company mug that read, "Trust me, I'm legal." Dana found out 30 minutes later. She was still in the conference room, waiting, suspended in some kind of HR purgatory where coffee is withheld and clocks tick louder than your thoughts. When they re-entered, they had new expressions. Less disgust, more detachment. Like the decision had been moved from the heart to the ledger. Numbers, risk, damage control. Due to the nature of this ongoing matter, they said, you're being placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of a full internal investigation. Her voice cracked. Wait, unpaid? No one nodded. No one blinked. She stood, almost knocked over the chair, pacing like a trapped animal. This is a misunderstanding. You have no idea what he's been like at home. He pushed me to travel. He didn't support. The HR director lifted a hand. Dana, we've reviewed the footage. We've read the emails. The language alone violates 3 different conduct clauses in your leadership contract. And then came the nail. The promotion is being rescinded. That word. Rescinded. Not paused. Not reviewed. Gone. Everything she'd paraded around the office for the past month, title bump, salary upgrade, corner office with the little view of the skyline, gone. And by the time she left that conference room, pale and red-eyed with a face blotched by humiliation, her team already knew. Because Mick had mouthed off to one of the analysts while being escorted out. Because someone overheard the words hotel, affair, and HR cluster in the break room and posted a vague status on Slack. Some promotions don't age well. Her name was circulating like blood in shark water. And Dana, once the golden girl of the quarter, the face of the Women in Power campaign, was now radioactive. People didn't make eye contact. Even her assistant deleted "Congrats, boss lady" from her Instagram story. No calls. No messages. Just the quiet unraveling of everything Dana had built, tied neatly to a USB drive Greg had uploaded from their living room 24 hours earlier while she rehearsed her speech about vision and grit. And she still didn't know the worst part. That Greg hadn't even sent the most damning clip. He hadn't needed to. Because sometimes, the smallest leaks sink the grandest ships. And Dana? She was already deep below the waterline. The house was quiet again. No footsteps pacing upstairs. No barking into Bluetooth earbuds. No keyboard clatter as Dana fired off her daily gospel of micromanagement from the home office. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood settling like a body exhaling after holding its breath too long. Greg sat in the living room, legs crossed, rereading an old paperback he hadn't touched in years. It was missing the back cover. He didn't care. He wasn't really reading, anyway. It had been 2 days since Dana's implosion. She hadn't come home. Not after the suspension, not after the promotion vanished, not after she slunk out of that skyscraper with her coat wrinkled under her arm and her purse half-zipped like dignity had become optional. Her car was still gone. Her closet untouched. He thought maybe she'd show up at midnight. Maybe drunk. Maybe crying. Maybe with some melodramatic monologue about how he didn't understand what it's like to be under pressure all the time. But she didn't. No messages. No keys in the door. Nothing. Until his phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. He answered anyway. Greg. It was Dana's sister, Melissa. Her voice had that tense kindness people use when they're asking for something while pretending they're not. He leaned back into the chair. Hey, Melissa. I don't want to intrude, she began, her voice already straining. But have you heard from her? No. She's not answering any of us. Not Mom, not me. We think she might be in a dark place. Greg said nothing. Melissa hesitated, then continued. I'm not saying you did anything. She's not well. She said some really strange things on the phone last night. About her job. Her life. Regrets. She sounded. Greg closed the book softly and set it on the armrest. Did she mention the part where she toasted me as a loser in front of my parents? Melissa went quiet. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Did she say anything about mocking me in front of my father, who, by the way, has a limited number of nights left on this planet, and doing it with a smirk so wide I could see the outline of her next affair in her molars? Greg, Melissa's voice was a whisper now. She's spiraling. She's not the Dana you knew. Greg chuckled once, bitter and hollow. You think I don't know that? I'm not saying you're responsible. I'm just saying she might not have anyone else to turn to. He stared out the window. The street was still. No car. No silhouette. Just the amber hue of a porch light that never shut off unless he flicked the switch himself. She made her choice, he said finally, each word placed with surgical precision. She humiliated me in front of my family. She laughed at my loyalty. She gambled a good life for ego and a cheap affair with a man who folds faster than laundry. And now that it's all blown up in her face, she wants me to catch the pieces. She's still your wife. Greg took a slow breath. No, she was my wife. Now she's just the punchline to a cake joke. He could hear Melissa breathing on the other end, caught between sympathy and horror. Then, softly, almost inaudibly, Greg added, "Let her feel it, Melissa. Let her sit in it. The shame, the silence, the loss. I've been sitting in it for years." He hung up. No rage. No slamming. Just a soft click. And for the first time in a very long while, he looked around the quiet house, not as a prison he had to tiptoe through, but as a space he could finally breathe in. The ghosts of humiliation were still there, but they were starting to shut up. The messages hadn't stopped, not really. They just started arriving in quieter waves. Desperation has a rhythm, and Dana had finally moved into the pleading phase. Her sentences were longer now. Less venom, more fear. The ego had burned off. All that was left was a woman clawing through her own wreckage, texting from whatever hotel or friend's couch she'd fled to. By the time Greg scrolled past message number 192, his phone was warm in his palm. "Please. You're the only one who knows how to fix this. No threats. No gaslighting. Just that, please." She finally said it. He could see her in his mind's eye, sitting on the edge of a borrowed bed, makeup streaked, phone clutched like a life vest in open water. Maybe her nails were still perfectly done. Maybe not. Didn't matter. She was unraveling now. He didn't respond right away. He went to the kitchen, refilled his coffee, sat at the same table where she once barked into her laptop while he brought her toast. Then he opened his photos, scrolled past the vacation shots. The dinner they had 2 anniversaries ago before her eyes started glazing over mid-conversation. Past the blurry concert pic she insisted they take even though he hated crowds. Until he found it. The cake. She'd taken that photo herself before the guests arrived. She had wanted to post it. A perfect, curated shot of success with her funny little jab scribbled in black icing. "To my husband, thanks for nothing." She'd even done a second take because the lighting wasn't dramatic enough. Greg remembered that. She made him hold a ring light. Said her phone camera didn't capture the mood right. The mood being smug, untouchable, victorious. He saved the image, opened the text thread, uploaded the photo. No caption. Not yet. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, he added a line beneath it. "Now you know how it feels. Send." And that was it. He muted the thread again, put the phone face down. Then he stood by the window and watched the neighborhood breathe. Children walking home from school. A couple arguing softly by their mailbox. A delivery truck honking at a dog in the street. Normal life. Other lives. Not hers anymore. Her silence stretched into the afternoon. No reply. No bubble. Just the digital vacuum left behind when a narcissist runs out of mirrors. Greg didn't need her response. Because that image wasn't for a conversation. It was a memorial. Not to their marriage. That had died a long time ago. It was a funeral for the version of Dana who thought she could destroy him in public and still expect him to rescue her in private. The cake had just been sugar and sponge. But now it was a gravestone. And Dana? She'd finally read the inscription. 2 weeks later, Greg stood in front of a room full of engineers and project leads, wearing a new blazer that still had a bit of that stiff store crease in the sleeves. The firm was local, but well-funded, young blood mixed with old heads, a company trying to do things right in an industry that usually didn't. He hadn't applied. They'd called him. Someone on their leadership team had heard what happened. Not all the sordid details, just the outline. A long-married man in middle management who had handled a professional disruption with composure. That was the word they used, composure. The HR grapevine sanitized everything, but the core of it remained. A betrayal. A scandal. A man who didn't scream or implode, just repositioned and moved forward. That intrigued them. They didn't want drama. They wanted structure. They wanted someone who could walk through a fire and not bring the smoke with him. The offer came fast: consulting lead, flexible hours, remote-friendly, triple his previous salary. He didn't even hesitate. He gave 2 weeks' notice at his old job, not out of obligation, but because closure mattered. He left clean. Empty desk. Thanked the admin staff. Declined the goodbye sheet cake someone had ordered at the last minute. He didn't need another cake. At the welcome luncheon, a younger guy named Brent, project manager, clearly bright but a little too eager, sat across from him with a salad he wasn't eating and said, "So what inspired the switch?" After all these years. Greg stirred his coffee, looked around. The room was warm, safe. No passive aggression, no performance masks. He leaned back and smiled. Not big, not smug, just a half smile like the beginning of a private joke. "A cake," he said. Brent blinked. "Sorry, a joke," Greg added, letting the words settle. "And the moment I realized silence is more powerful than revenge." Brent gave a polite chuckle, confused but respectful. He moved on, asked about project scopes, agile methodology, vendor procurement. Greg answered, calmly, clearly, like a man who hadn't just climbed out of a war zone, but had designed the map that trapped the enemy in it. Later that afternoon, while touring the office, he passed a break room with a whiteboard where someone had written in marker, "Speak softly and carry a big spreadsheet." He almost laughed. He thought of Dana, wherever she was now, probably crafting a new narrative, probably telling herself that Greg had ruined her career because he couldn't handle a strong woman, that it was retaliation, patriarchy, or some other buzzword she'd weaponized to avoid accountability. He didn't care. He didn't need an apology. The silence he'd left her in was louder than any apology she could fake. In his car that night, Greg opened the glove compartment and removed the USB drive. He held it in his hand, turned it over. Then he dropped it in the center console and closed it gently. Not because he needed to forget, but because he no longer needed to remember. There are some victories that don't require parades. Just peace.